Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
I was saying that I've only known Monica Gagliano a month, but one thing I've learned about her is it's very hard to tell her no when she has an idea. And the idea that we are playing with right now is a sort of literalization, a materialization of embranglement, which is a term we all learned earlier today in Banu's talk. So if you don't have a thread, grab a thread. Grab a ball of yarn, throw it around. You are all now officially embrangled. Yes, this is in violation of fire code. Yes, we do have scissors to cut you out if need be. And we'll begin very shortly once Monica makes her way to the stage. This will be our final, it's a conversation this afternoon, and it's a conversation that's serving two purposes. One is to draw Monica out on her life and work, and also it will be a summative conversation. So Monica and I will be reflecting on some of the themes of the conference and some of the embranglements that we are all now tethered to and engaged in. So, okay. So, for the sake of time, Monica Gagliano perhaps requires no introduction, but I will introduce her now as she is engaging in a ritual that she will henceforth explain. Monica Gagliano is a research scientist renowned for her pioneering work in plant communication, cognition, and subjectivity. Recognized as one of Biohabitat's 24 most inspiring women of ecology, alongside Jane Goodall and Rachael Carson, her research challenges conventional boundaries of intelligence and inspires new ways of relating to the natural world. Monica's contributions include numerous influential scientific papers and books, including Thus Spoke the Plant and The Mind of Plants, which she co-edited with John C. Ryan and Patricia Vieira. She is a research associate professor in evolutionary ecology in Australia and a free-roaming explorer, bridging Western and indigenous science to develop innovative approaches to planetary changes. And she is also a scholar in residence with us here at the Center for the Study of World Religions for the month of May, and I'm hoping to welcome her to the stage at any second now. Welcome, join me in welcoming Monica Gagliano. Okay. Monica, you want to catch your breath?
They told me to turn this thing on.
Yeah, turn it on so we can hear you. Yeah. We're arriving, we're here. So,
how does it smell? Like, aside from my sweaty smell, like, what else do you smell? I thought we learned that you can't tell what it's like. But still, it's not going in, is it?
But we know it's not stinkhorn. We can say that much. Monica, I was hoping to begin by, actually haven't shared this with you. I'd love to share with you how I heard about your book and who introduced me to your book.
Oh dear.
Oh no, it's good. It's good. And I hope from there to do a bit of framing around how your work strikes me and how I think it strikes many people. And from there, we'll unfold the conversation about you and then solicit your reflections on what's going on and what has been going on here for the last 3 days. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Is there anything you want to say?
Them, what it is that I spray on them, just in case someone is freaking out, thinking that it's toxic or something.
Okay.
But in fact, what you're smelling is the key ingredient of one of the most famous perfumes in the history of perfumes, number 5. And the reason why I took it in as a plant, because it's a tree, so it was a bit difficult to actually bring the tree along with me. But this is the closest way that we get to encounter it. His name is, the local name is Palo Rosa. And he's a, family of the Palo Santo, which of course is facing extinction because of our very aggressive, spiritualized economy. Palo Rosa is already extincted in the wild because of our aggressive infatuation with smells, especially number 5, to the point that this is being produced as an essential oil and then by an indigenous community in the Amazon, and it's part of a project for trying to regenerate this tree, which is very important, not just for making perfume, but for all sorts of medicinal properties. And it's funny, and of course, following Michael is like, it's inevitable to of course, disarticulation, that tension between the two polarities. In making it pretty much extinct in the wild, they forced the rehabilitation of this tree and realized that, we can't just plant the tree, because just planting the seed doesn't do anything. It doesn't work. This is a very fiddly tree, because we need to learn its relationship with other species that it likes to grow with, and the mycelium. It grows with specific fungi. And so all of these it was extirpated and taken away. And now, ironically, we have to re-engage and rediscover it. And in doing that, we're actually getting a much more intimate connection with this tree. That's why I think she's here.
Thank you for bringing us into intimacy with an actual plant and the story of a plant and its fungal relations. And I think that you've been very brave in asserting your own intimate relationship with plants, and at great cost, I think. And principally through this book, Thus Spoke the Plant. Who's read Thus Spoke the Plant? It's not a competition with Entangled Life. We did this earlier.
There is no competition. We already know that.
And this was actually the very first thing we ever read. I'm looking for Natalia. I think this is true. The very first thing we ever read in our reading group here. And we read it because I was introduced to it by a colleague and a friend and a mentor, Jeffrey Kripal, who is a scholar of mysticism and esotericism at Rice University, where I did my undergraduate work, and he loves this book. And you're thinking, wow, a scholar of mysticism and esotericism. He doesn't write about you in this book, but I think had your book come before he wrote this book, he would have. He wrote this incredible book called The Flip, Epiphanies of Mind and the Future of Knowledge. And in this book, he chronicles several scientists who encounter the unexplainable or have non-ordinary experiences, encounters, and they walk away with new insights about mind and matter and spirit and cosmos. And they often spend their careers trying to make sense of these experiences. And one of my favorite examples in this book is actually the Hans Berger, who was a 19th century psychiatrist who actually invented the EEG. Does anyone know why he invented the EEG? He had a sudden experience of telepathy with his sister, who at the very moment he was almost crushed by a carriage, knew that he was going to be crushed by a carriage, and sent him a telegram. And so for the rest of his life, he's convinced that this was a moment of telepathy, and he's trying to figure out why. But he doesn't abandon science. He is still a scientist, but the pursuit of understanding this episode caused him to produce the technology that would eventually lead to the EEG, which is a machine that's in every single hospital and is vital to things like epilepsy. And I love this because in this book, and what I see in your work is these kind of people who have these flips, as he calls them, but they're not a disavowal of science or scientific training, but they're kind of bimodal. Like they come out of them both radically critical and deeply sympathetic of wanting to understand more, to be a more capacious scientist. And getting to a question here, you and I were eating lunch the other day, and you said something like, I'm a formally trained scientist. I did science. I did that. I do that. And then something changed for me. So yeah, just to open it up, like, how would you characterize that change? And do you feel that resonance of like the flip that I'm describing in this book?
The flip does conjure like something flipped, and that you're gone lost somewhere. And maybe,
you're not lost.
And maybe you do. You need to get lost for a little while to realize what it is that is worth retaining, what it is that is actually useful. Mm-hmm. And because what I realized, and I have had these flips too many times now to count. But what I realized is that, there was a lot of stuff that it was handed over to me as part of my training, for which I'm absolutely very grateful. But it actually it's done its work. And with many things, and plant, again, a beautiful example is like dying doesn't mean that that's the end. Dying could be also a beginning in a different way. It could be a continuation, but in a different form. And so, but you need to be able to let go of those flowers that now are no more, or those leaves that now don't serve you, or they serve a different purpose. We saw yesterday, like, don't take the leaves away, because they have another purpose, but they don't need to stay attached to the tree. And so I shedded many leaves and I let go of many flowers. And in the process, all I can say is that, because now often people say like, so how would you define yourself now and what do you do? And it's like, no idea. But it doesn't mean that I'm clueless. I'm perfectly, like, consciously deciding to sit in this space of not knowing. And it's not comfortable, and it goes against everything that I was trained for, because I'm supposed to be the one that knows. I'm a scientist. We heard it as well on the first day, like, we know this. So that's the imprinting that I have. And every time I'm approaching something, I had to not be tempted to go there, or consciously acknowledge that, and then like, but actually I do not know this. And what else can it be expressed here? What else can I discover about myself, about these other, and the space in between? And I was talking to Jacob some point, and I really appreciate, there was so much throughout the conference to, like, I have notes and notes, and I was talking to Jacob earlier today, and I was like, I really appreciate this tension between these polarities that he describes so well in the work of Arber, right? And this tension is precisely what I feel that's what life is. And so I want to be right there in the middle, which is also, Michael was talking about this middle place. And also, as Michael pointed out for Emily Dickinson, it looks like you're totally incoherent. But actually, the job, I think, at hand is to go into that total incoherence and then maybe try to find the words. And that's why probably poetry is really the best thing. But actually, I'm so terrible at poetry that I won't try. But trying to find a way to express that which is incoherent, that is resisting you to give it a form. And that's because then it becomes like, oh, now we know this. And I'm like, no, but actually, no. And it's this constant back and forth. So sometimes I totally look mad, and it's okay. And some of the times I totally look like absolutely boring, and it's okay. It's those, those extremes. But my intention is to sit in between.
So I'm thinking of two things. One is your boring polarity, and maybe we'll just like give a little lip service to your quote unquote boring polarity. And I'm thinking about that in dialogue with, Merlin's invocation in our conversation on the first day, that the sciences they're a multiplicity. It's not science, it's the sciences. And you are still operating within boring science. Like, you're still publishing scientific papers with scientific collaborators. And, in the spirit of kind of starting with the latest and greatest of that so-called boring science, and at the risk of doing the whole, like, now we know thing, that Merlin warned us against. But I'm wondering, can you talk about, whichever one you want to start with first, your recent eclipse study or your orchid study, since there's an orchid right here. Tell us, so you haven't abandoned that boring so-called scientific side. Is there one of those studies that you feel like is useful to presence in this room today?
Well, the orchids work is actually, I feel like I'm the research assistant of a very smart younger colleague, Daniela Scaccabarozzi, who is in Uppsala, and she is the orchid whisperer. And so for me, it's a great honor to be able to be involved in her research and contribute in whichever way I can. And so we have a lot of conversation, discussions, and of course orchids are very mischievous, as we know. So it's fun to work with them. The eclipse work, I guess it's a little bit more interesting because it brings up questions that are much bigger than just the data that are there. And for those who haven't seen it, because it was literally got published while I was on the plane to come here, basically the work was done in the Dolomites in the north of Italy, and the original study was about something totally different. As is often the case with science, you start with one thing and it's like, oh, but what about this? And then you go off, and that was the trail that maybe was more interesting to follow. So the path that you're not meant to take, but then you do. And so we had this equipment which of itself, even without looking at the data of itself, the equipment itself, the infrastructure that was built by my colleagues who are physicists, technologists, engineers, it's already a fit of science as it is, because it allows us to monitor in real time multiple trees. So basically we were able to follow in real time what was happening at the electrical level or bioelectrical, which sums up a little bit the state of the tree and what's happening for the tree, both at the individual level, but mostly, or most importantly, as a network. So we're seeing both the individuals and the collective. And of course, then it happens that there was an eclipse, the equipment was running, and it was like, well, it's quite convenient, isn't it? And let's have a look at this data, because of course the eclipse is a very big celestial event. And we know the plants respond very strongly to gravity. And so this is a gravitational event, really, because you got the sun and the moon pulling together. And in fact, the physicists know very well, they have a name for that pull, and they're called gravimetric waves. And during eclipses of that kind, especially when it's a solar eclipse, you have the sum of those gravitational pulls together. It's the maximum pull of gravity that you can have. And eclipses are interesting also from many perspectives, like in history they have stopped wars. We know when there is an eclipse, we are all like, like gathering, like, because we have to see it. And it's so funny because really it's like it lasted such a short time, and we all like travel to see these two planets moving and kind of passing each other. They pass each other all the time. It's just like, oh, now I can see it, so it's happening. And but what happened is that because we had this long baseline, we were monitoring already this system for a while. And then the eclipse arrives, and then the eclipse goes away. So we have a long baseline before, then we have that event, and then we have the after. And so the before allowed us to see the natural variability of the individual trees in this network of trees. And of course there is variability. It was very clear the circadian cycle, so night, day, what's happening with like photosynthesis, perspiration, all of the normal physiologies, I guess, that we would expect. And then something happened just before, and just is relative. It was 14 hours before the eclipse arrives at this location on the north of Italy. So the sun is actually closer to Australia than not in Europe. Some trees change their bioelectrical behavior. And what I mean change is like tenfold change. So it's not just like, oh, it was a little wiggle. Are you sure that it's not just the same, or like, you know, the light kind of change, or something about the temperature? No, it's a big wiggle. And 14 hours before, so they're not just, oh, the light went out, or the temperature dropped, they detected something else. And then we can see, because we're monitoring as a network, we can see that these signals actually then spreads through the network. And the results of that is that all of the trees that we are monitoring suddenly are doing the same thing. If this was an animal system, we would say that what happened 14 hours before would be called anticipation, which is a key feature of then synchronicity, so synchronized behavior, which is what you would see when birds flock together, or school of fishes, and what we see when we all synchronize in a dance or something. There is an anticipation, and then the following cooperation and synchronization of behavior occurs. And then, of course, that happens during the eclipse. And then the eclipse moves on, and the trees slowly, they just return to do their own business as individual trees. So basically, this was amazing because first, we were not expecting anything. So it's always amazing to have something like that when you're not expecting anything. But also, we were literally watching, in a way, again, collapsing these two polarities, collapsing the necessity of being, are you looking either at the tree, at the individual, or are you looking at the forest? In that moment, you had both. The forest is made of individual trees, but the individual trees don't exist because in reality, because of their connection, just like you are now, they're one system, one unit. And during the eclipse, they behave like one entity, one agent. The other part, of course, which is to me mind-blowing, one of the colleagues is an older professor in quantum physics. And he was, and I'm using this term not as like a, new agey, yeah, quantum physics, I understand what it means. I have no idea. That part I had to trust that he knew what those formulas were doing. But he was one of there are kind of like, I think, 8 or more models that use different physics to describe the activity of and the coordinated behavior of neurons in the human brain. So this is one of the 8 or whatever models that describe human brain activity. And so just for fun, we said, well, we got this data. Why don't we see how it fits in your model? And we never seen anything fitting so well, especially because we're talking about two systems that are apparently so totally different, but maybe they're not. And so again, collapsing scale as well. You're seeing this scale and that scale, and something that nature is, obviously decided, that works. We're going to just repeat it over and over again. Mm-hmm. Let's see if those scientists can see the pattern. Yeah. And that's how it felt.
I want to keep with this. I love that we're sticking with the Nicholas of Cusa coincidence of opposites. Thank you, Jacob. Frame here. There's another set of polarities that you and your work and in your life have tried to collapse. And I think maybe I'll just read directly from Thus Spoke the Plant. And that is this, the coincidence of opposites, that is subjectivity and objectivity. Mm-hmm. Through what seemed an impossible feat, the marriage between the objectivity of the scientific method and knowledge and the subjectivity of transcendental experiences and intuition not only proved to be absolutely possible, but also incredibly profound and an exciting coup, that is COUP. And I want to talk to you about that collapsing of subjectivity and objectivity in the context of a conversation we had on the first day. Mm-hmm. After the Light Eaters panel, Zoe posed this question of like, how do we get our humanness out of the way when we're studying plants? And you raised your hand and I think made a beautiful intervention, which is like, no, we need to acknowledge and reckon with our humanness and use that as a gateway to empathy. And that, of course, is something that feminists and STS scholars have been saying for a long time. But I want to draw you out on that a little bit more, that how you collapse those two things in your work and getting that dual movement of putting the humanness aside and also situating it. How do you juggle that? How do you resolve those opposites?
I don't resolve them, first of all.
Yeah.
I don't think that they want to be resolved, and that creates tension. Yeah. So, and again, if I can stay with that tension, I don't mean that I'm always successful, but at least there is an attempt to stay with that tension, then I know I'm onto something, mm-hmm. And then I guess I would really want to honor and mention that something that I felt it was missing from the conversations, except for today we had a beautiful intervention, and I already thanked them. Is the indigenous perspective, but not just as a lip service. And by the way, there are also indigenous people somewhere doing this. But it's like, this is the perspective that has got so much to teach, because as it was said before, it was like, it's not even an issue. It's like, there are the quintessential, at least the people that I have interacted with in Australia, South America, even here, they are full-on scientists. Mm-hmm. The amount of knowledge, as we would consider like the knowing of things, it's incredible. And yet they are totally also engaging with not only the modern humans as the plant, the animal, the bacteria, the fungus, but also with the beyond the visible, beyond what we consider matter. So I think that it was in one of the conversations this morning, I can't remember if it was Jessica Lee that was talking about, sorry, I did write notes, but someone this morning, I think, mentioned that colonialism basically started with, let's remove the people from the land. And we know it's been done like, that's the strategy. And then let's remove the spirit from the living. So remove the spirit from plants, remove the spirit from nature. And then let's make land as a resource. And I think that what I'm learning by engaging with indigenous, both ontology and epistemologies, is, okay, so I'm not in the position to give back the land, but I can help where I can. But I am in a position where I can help the conversation towards giving back the land its own wisdom in its own spirit, and certainly I can engage with the plants and the animals and the fungi and the bacteria and listen to where is the spirit gone and what does it want to say. And what you might discover is that the spirit actually, colonial views are insisting that they succeeded in removing spirit from the living and removing the spirit from the land. But that's one of the story that is being spun, and we spin lots of stories. And I guess I'm trying to using a different yarn and spin a different story that is actually being told over and over again by a certain component of humanity. And I'm trying to learn from that.
Thank you for naming the lack of indigenous perspectives and conversations in this conference. That I feel like that should be its own conference in of itself, and very well could be. I'm thinking about this question, your remarks just now, and the question that Liz von Volkenberg posed, this kind of what is science and what is not. And obviously there's been an effort to apply indigenous as a qualifier of science in order to instantiate other ways of knowing. And I'm curious about your relationship to this category of science, because sometimes I feel in you it's like your project is a reinvention of science, but then there's also a moving outside of the modes of knowledge that science rewards and acknowledges. So like maybe that's another coincidence of opposites, but is your project fundamentally let's expand what science deems permissible, or is it there are just other things that are not within the realm of science but are valid forms of knowledge? What is science and what is not for you?
I think it was this morning again, the West is a project, not a place. And so Western science is a recent project. And we don't have to go too far back to realize that what science is today is not what science was even just a couple of centuries ago. And I think, and it's been mentioned several times by different people as well throughout the days, the call for making the making and the construction of science or even like of scholarship as a construction of bodies of knowledge to come together from what now are separate disciplines. It's like, I think it was you, Liz, it's like, how come that I don't know about, the history of my own practice, or the history of philosophy, or what happened with the science that was here before the West invented science. And so I think my attempt, unconscious mostly, conscious when I can think of it properly, is, I don't want to exclude anything. And if Western science, which at some point it will end and it will become an old story, like all the other stories that we've been telling, decides that, okay, this is no longer how we do it, and now we're gonna include the things that we don't see, then, my approach will become totally redundant. And I said this many times, especially when I started working with plants. I thought, the moment my research became absolutely, utterly redundant, I really succeeded. I really did something with my science. because it means that we don't have to keep asking these questions, which for anybody that has been outside and gardeners, or just every time you eat your food or you breathe, you would know that it's like some of these questions are intellectual entertainment. Really. And yeah, we enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. And, you know, some of us, that this is our job. But actually, at the end, it's like, I think fundamentally, we all know. Otherwise, we wouldn't just go for a walk when we don't feel so crash hot. And we wouldn't, you know, I can't wait to breathe the fresh air, or, you know, like, we all know. And I think this speaks of something that goes beyond the things that we can touch. And science has got such a long history of things that were invisible. Then we invent something that is like, oh, now that is not invisible anymore. And so we can take it from the metaphysical and become physical. And the metaphysical of today is actually very tangible. It's just that we refuse, science as we know it in the West refuses to acknowledge that there are technologies and methodologies which are very precise. They are mostly of the indigenous kind, and we just don't want to acknowledge them. So my project is to acknowledge them and see what I can learn, and being very aware of not appropriating them, because I am a Western white woman born in Europe and, you know, traveled and lived in many places, but fundamentally I have that luggage in me. So I don't know if this answered the question.
It absolutely, no, it absolutely does. And actually, it reminds me of a paper I didn't have time to ask Merlin about. In 2020, Merlin wrote a really sweet paper in a social sciences journal about the enigma that Richard Schulte's, enigma, I'm putting in scare quotes, that Richard Schulte, a famous ethnobotanist, encountered when he went to the Amazon and was looking at groups that used ayahuasca, because he could not distinguish between different vines, and he was certain that there was no way that anyone could visually distinguish between these two vines. And the groups that he was working with were like, duh, like, and at a distance, they could tell them apart really easily. And this is, for him, it's an enigma, but it's like, it's only an enigma if you don't believe that they're talking to these plants. Like ayahuasca is something that they're apprenticing to and learning from and engaging. And so, yeah, I think that word enigma is so interesting in this context, because it's like, of course, Richard Schultes couldn't distinguish between these plants in the way that his informants could, because of a totally different life world and a totally different valuation of sources of knowledge. So plants talk to you.
I talk to everyone, but, you know, I listen. That's the only difference. They talk to everyone, but I listen sometimes.
Yeah, thus spoke the plant. It's not a metaphor.
No.
Tell me more about that.
I don't like metaphors. No, I do like metaphors, but in this case, no. And with most of I would say all of my work, I try to make it clear that when I write about plants, doing things, thinking, feeling, speaking, being wise, I mean it literally. Mm-hmm. And they have surprised me too many times to be so arrogant and deny their wisdom and their presence. Mm. And in fact, I am moving more and more into not only, for me, they started like, oh, what is a plant? I don't even know. Because I wasn't trained as a plant physiologist or a botanist. I'm an animal ecologist, and I worked with fish. So coral reefs, underwater, that was me, and which I loved. And so the encounter with plants has been a gradual, I feel like they've been literally teaching me. And from the very beginning, when I had to stop being a marine scientist, and I thought, oh, well, that's the end of my career. It was pretty short. I thought I really loved, I always wanted to be a scientist. And now that I kind of finished my PhD and that's it, okay. And it was actually, a very common plant, a chili plant in this new garden. It's like, you can work with us. I said, what do you mean? I don't know anything about plants. Said, we'll teach you. And they also are very literal when they say. And so it's been a progressive thing of like, okay, plants as teachers. and which is also a concept that exists very deeply in indigenous context. And then plants as collaborator and co-creators. And so my next move would be like when I will publish my next paper, if I will ever publish another paper, it would be acknowledging also the plants co-authors. And I know other colleagues who have started acknowledging people who work with mountains or rivers, acknowledging the authorship of that river, because without them, there will be no story. It's their story too. So the human and modern humans are both authoring and co-creating that vision. So why shouldn't they be acknowledged? So the vision is to integrate all of these different bodies of knowledge, which are both human and non-human or more than human.
Are you optimistic about other people taking up these moves that you are modeling and proposing?
I don't care.
Good answer.
No, in the sense that I wouldn't, a part of me, of course, would like, I'm going to do this amazing project. Everyone is going to love it. They're going to think it's the best thing that ever hit the earth. And everyone is going to like, integrate it, and we will do things differently. That's the naive part of me, and the child that is like, how come that you don't want to play? It's like, there's so much to play here. How come you don't want to play? But let's say the mature adult is not that it's like dumping water on the fire, but it's more like, well, realistically, probably it's not going to happen as quickly as you would like, and I have very little patience. So for me, it should have happened already. Before I do it, should have happened. Yeah. And yet, I want to get my mature adult to have the opportunity to be surprised. Because with the work with the plants, for example, 15 years ago, when we started the work on the plant bioacoustics, so the actual acoustics, the voice of the plants. I shouldn't take I'm removing the little inverted comma.
Did you just
see,
do this?
I just did this.
Did Monica Gagliano
you
just
see?
scare
Like,
quote?
No. But yes, so the plants able to use sound as part of their ecological world and interactions and mediate it through sound, both that they emit and they listen to. Well, when we first started, you can imagine some of the comments. And, are you doing Stevie Wonder thing? Or, this is the secret life of plants all over again. Yeah. And I was like, okay. Oh, then, of course, I got called hippie and pseudoscientist and all sorts of, and other adjective that is not worth repeating right here. But it didn't take, not even 15 years. And now that I know of, there are at least 3 labs in the world dedicated to plant bioacoustics. Yeah. And of course, history repeats. So they're not even acknowledging that someone else did it before. And so the labs actually read like, we are the first people to do this. And you're like, but that's not true. It's like, okay. Because of course, I also wasn't the first.
Yeah.
There is like a big chunk of humanity that has known this for a long time.
Yeah.
And so
I feel like that's a good segue to entanglement and lineage and why. Do you want to explain what this is? Like what?
What do you think? How does it feel? Huh? Has everyone attached it? Okay, all the blues, lift your hand. Orange, 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 orange. Oh, not many orange. Look at that. There must be a patch of something, a lichen or something that just grew there. This was Rachel and I had a chat via Zoom. Me in Australia, you here, just to have a chat in advance of what we could talk about. And as the conversation, I never thought of doing this until in the conversation, this thing emerged because I just read about Maria Lai, who is an artist, and I would say the pioneer or the precursor of relational art. And she comes from a little village she came because she passed away a few years ago. From a little village in the islands of Sardinia, in Italy, and very conservative place, and she had her classical training as an artist, so she went to the big academia in Rome and Florence and all of this. And then, of course, like many of these Morgane, I would call them, she felt too restricted in that space, and she actually returned to her little village and her home and decided to do her artwork through weaving, which was the kind of traditional aspect of the culture where she was born into. And of course, she took her weaving to another world. And one of the famous things that she did was she bound people to their mountain. Legarsi alla montagna, I think is the title in Italian, which I saw it translated as connecting with the mountain, but it's more than connecting, it's literally tying you, binding you to the land, to the place. And she did it, again, not as a metaphor, literally. So she basically shared this denim ribbon. I think it was like 17 miles of denim ribbon. And it was done over 3 days. And it was done with all of the people in her village, about 1,000 people involved. And each one of them started stringing this ribbon through their houses and pass it on. And then eventually it got attached to the mountain. Mm. So you can imagine, even visually, you have this ribbon of connections, you know. And not only that, but some people, of course, in the village, as it happens, you know, like you have your friends, but you also have those families or those people, it's like you don't even remember why, but like we don't talk to them. You know? So some people put beautiful ribbons attached to the ribbon, or even loaves of bread as a symbol of like a really close connection, familiar friendship. And others were like very tense, tense ribbon, like, well, we are connected, but you know. And when we were discussing this, I just thought, you know, I didn't actually thank you that you're still here. But I thought after 3 days intensively thinking together, speaking, listening, wouldn't it be nice to just maybe have something that it's a bit playful, but it materializes what we've been talking about? And so then we started thinking about the hazards of doing this. But I'm very grateful that Rachel said, okay, well, fine, let me work it out. So, and the question would be like, how easily you're gonna get untangled from this? Yeah. And of course, this ribbon initially, and we talked about it yesterday, it's like, what is it? Is it cotton? I was like, no, it's synthetic. And I was like, initially acrylic. I thought, oh no, fantastic. Because this is really like our moment right now. It's very synthetic. Mm-hmm. Like we live in a world where, you know, plastic is the thing that it's everywhere and it keeps moving and connecting us. Like bottle, my shoes, like. So I thought, oh, it's even better now. And of course, I think that if it was cotton, you could probably, like, you know, rip it with your teeth or something. I don't know about the synthetic stuff, but that's your problem, not mine. And also, like, of course, this is a materialization of the invisible. Mm. So these connections, especially we've been spending 3 days together, these connections were already in place, they've been in place all the time. We're just making it, you know, visible now through these threads. And we've been talking about threads a lot. There've been lots of weaving of stories. So this was trying to bring it to the eye and bring it as, you know, an attempt of like, what is entanglement like? You can't say.
It kind of sucks by the looks of it. Yeah. Well, it's a good reminder of the sort of like...
That is messy. Look at that.
Not to romanticize interconnection. You know,
right.
That it's this alloy of competition, cooperation, and then sometimes it's very inconvenient to be interconnected.
It makes you trip.
Very beautiful. Please, no one trip. We've done a lot of thinking together, and I do need to end not with thinking, but with thanking. First of all, thank you, Monica, for this rich conversation. It was beautiful, and I feel like we're just getting started. I really want to thank the AV team. This is the busiest time of the year, and we were like, hello, can we have a major 3-day conference? So thank you, Bob, Robert, everyone who works for you. A big thank you to the events team, to Lori, Bashwar, Sarah, all of our amazing volunteers. Thank you. To Gosha and to Charles for allowing this initiative to take root at the center. Thank you for trusting us and what we are up to. As Natalia said, finding science in a divinity school, a little strange. And thank you finally to our amazing team, Natalia, Russ, Alitza. There were 250 papers submitted to this conference, and we read them all. So I just want to thank all of you for an incredibly rich 3 days, and I hope you continue the conversations and that this yields collaborations in your life and new embranglements.
And thank you to Rachel.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Untangle yourselves.
Yeah, enjoy that.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu, copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.